I get a lot of questions about what it was like to have such a dramatic spiritual awakening, having been taken to the other side and living in the light for many years before being called into the shadows. And people are often curious and even afraid of what that is or what it was like. And I always say that exploring the shadows was even more rewarding than exploring the light because it gave me so much access to myself, to my depth, and to the parts of me that were holding wounds and unmet needs. Without exploring the shadow, I wouldn't have been able to save those parts or love them or integrate them. So, to thoroughly answer this question and to speak to the journey of sensitive souls and everything we go through, I want to share what I learned from Carl Jung. What I will share is crucial for HSPs and old souls to hear. There are individuals who enter this life with what seems to be a more of an open door between the seen and the unseen. And people call them sensitive, empathic, intuitive. The poet calls them touched. The mystic calls them gifted. But Jung speaks of them as perhaps what they truly are, those who are born so close to the veil. And for such individuals, the world is not only what is apparent, it's also what trembles behind appearances. And that is both a burden and a blessing. These souls walk softly, they listen more than they speak, they cry at things others laugh at, they often feel out of place, not because they're broken, but because they carry too much of the world inside them. The wind, a tone of voice, the flicker of an eye, all these speak to them in ways that cannot be explained. They're not weak, they're receptive. But in a world that rewards armor and attachment, receptivity becomes dangerous. The highly sensitive person is not simply attuned to emotion, they're porous to the unconscious. They feel not only what others feel, but what others repress. They pick up the discarded fragments of the collective sorrow, fear, terror, and absorb them like psychic sponges. And this is why they're often exhausted. This is why they seek solitude, not because they dislike people, but because they're constantly carrying people. But this sensitivity, it's not only interpersonal, it's archetypal. These individuals are born under the dominion of the great inner gods. They're often visited in dreams, they travel in dreams. Their psyche is vivid, mythic, alchemical, and yet because they have no language for this, they often think something's wrong with them. They're told they're too emotional, too soft, too intense. But no, if you're one of these people, there's nothing wrong with you, but you are in danger. Jung says, with the full weight of seriousness, the sensitive soul is not rooted in self when they start out. And this means if they're not protected by knowledge, if they're not stabilized by inner work, they can become lost in the very depth they were born to navigate. So there's a hidden warning in his work, one he didn't always speak directly to, but he kind of left scattered like breadcrumbs through his writings. And it's this: the more sensitive you are to the unconscious, the greater your risk of being devoured by it. The unconscious doesn't differentiate between your soul and the world's pain. It doesn't say this suffering belongs to another. It says, here is what is repressed. Here is what needs to be seen. And the highly sensitive individual, if unaware, will mistake collective material for personal identity. They'll believe the sadness they feel is their own, when it may be the grief of a generation, right? They'll believe the fear they sense is their own, when it may be the anxiety of an entire room. They'll believe they are unwell, when in truth they are overwhelmed by the unspoken. And unless they learn the boundaries of the self, they risk merging with the chaos they were born to only witness. They become ashamed. I'm too sensitive. I can't function. But in dreams, symbols are abundant. You're intuitive. You're not sick. You're a vessel, but no one taught you how to hold this energy. So we have to begin the work, not of removing sensitivity, but of making it conscious. That is the key. Sensitivity that is unconscious becomes suffering, but sensitivity that is made conscious becomes vision. Right? Sensitivity that is unconscious becomes suffering, but sensitivity that is made conscious becomes vision. So if you're giving too much, you may have dreams of leaking vessels, flooding rooms, open wounds, right? If you're being invaded psychically, you may dream of strangers in your house, doors you forgot to lock. That happens to me all the time. Animals staring through glass. These aren't random, they're messages from the soul. Don't ignore them. Write them down, speak them, sit with them, let the image work. This isn't superstition. This is the sacred language of your own unconscious. And over time, something begins to happen. The dreams shift, the symbols change. Where there were floods, there is now a river. Where there were wounds, there's now a scar. Where there were faceless figures, there are now guides. Right? That's a beautiful moment, because the unconscious responds to relationship. It wants to be seen. And when the sensitive soul stops rejecting their gift, stops drowning in it, and begins to relate to it, the unconscious begins to collaborate. The world doesn't change, but you do. You begin to notice when your emotions are not yours, right? You begin to choose what you engage with rather than absorb by default. You begin to honor your body's signals, your dreams, metaphors, your intuition, wisdom. They slowly begin to center you, and you start to feel something rare. Not an idea of who you are, but a living presence. That's the self. From that place, your sensitivity becomes not a burden, but a gift of precision. You no longer react to everything, you respond to what is real, right? Instead of reacting to everything, you respond to what is real. And this changes everything, because most of the world is blind to its inner life. But you were born to feel, not as a victim, as a mirror that has first looked inward. So if you're highly sensitive, you must begin by accepting that you're not here to fit into the world as it is. You are here to feel what others refuse to feel, what others avoid to hear, what others silence, right? To see what others deny. But you can't do this alone. You can't do this unconsciously, otherwise you'll be consumed. There's a stage in every sensitive soul's journey where they become overwhelmed by the darkness they absorb. This may appear as depression, anxiety, a dark night of the soul, somatic symptoms, crisis. It's as if the soul has become waterlogged and the light can no longer shine through. And this is not failure, this is initiation. This is initiation. If the unconscious has chosen you as its vessel, it will demand your transformation. The dream begins to intensify. The outer world begins to mirror the inner. You're pulled into strange encounters and synchronicities, losses, awakenings. Nothing feels stable, and this is where many don't survive unchanged. But we're not meant to. Some numb themselves, some fragment, some cling to the persona and pretend everything's fine. But only a few surrender to the descent. They allow themselves to fall not into despair, but into depth. They begin the sacred work. And that is when the true path of the highly sensitive begins not as victim, but instead as mystic. Not as broken, but as initiated. Once you begin the descent into the depths of self, you will find that your sensitivity, once dismissed as fragility, now reveals itself as a gateway. But only if you don't turn away. The sensitive soul must descend consciously into the underworld of their own psyche. This is not a metaphor, it's an experiential truth. The descent is not something you imagine, it's something you endure. In dreams, it often takes the shape of tunnels, basements, caves, endless staircases, even drowning or being buried. And we don't want to fear these symbols. They're not there to destroy. They're initiations, they're invitations to face what has been buried, not only in you, but within the collective field. Because the highly sensitive person is not merely sensing their own wounds, they're tuning into the repressed soul of the culture. Their body becomes the mirror of the world's silence. And when that silence grows loud, it is the sensitive who tremble. They feel the weight of the unlived life, not only their own, but that of those around them. And so unless sensitive souls learn the structure of the self, unless they ground themselves in something deeper than emotion, they will float adrift between others' pain and their own. Confusion. That is why many sensitives become lost in roles. The healer, the listener, the empath, the peacemaker. I've been all of them. These roles offer a momentary sense of identity, but they are masks. They can't bear the full weight of the soul. Only the self can do that. The self is not the ego. It's not who you think you are. It is the whole of who you are, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, masculine and feminine, wounded and wise. And for the sensitive person, discovering the self is not a luxury. It is survival. We must be reborn when our sensitivity has taken us as far as it can alone. Then the unconscious must initiate you into the deeper pattern. If you are highly sensitive, your work is not to escape the world, but to enter it through your own soul. This begins with boundaries, psychic boundaries, energetic sovereignty. Sensitivity without boundaries is absorption. But sensitivity with boundaries becomes intuition. Sensitivity without boundaries is absorption. Sensitivity with boundaries is intuition. You're not meant to carry others. You're not meant to rescue the world. You are meant to mirror, right? It's forgotten parts. It's forgotten wisdom. We're meant to mirror the world's forgotten resources, essentially. This requires so much discipline, so much discernment. What is mine? What is not mine? What I'm feeling, what I'm receiving? Where do I end? Where does the other begin? And if we can see the necessity of the descent into our own depths, into our own underworld, and the wisdom of setting boundaries, not to shut the world out, but to let the self in, then we can understand what comes next. the initiation, because once the unconscious knows you are listening, once it senses you're no longer running from your dreams, but entering them with reverence, it begins to change its language. It no longer chases you with symbols of collapse. It begins to court you with symbols of becoming. A highly sensitive person who makes it this far will begin to see the world as a mirror. Every relationship, every encounter, every sensation will feel strangely charged, as if imbued with a hidden message. This isn't imagination, this is the archetypal field awakening. You're beginning to recognize what Jung called the myth. This isn't a metaphor. The soul lives in myth, the way the body lives in air. We're never outside it, only unconscious of it. And the sensitive individual is born closer to that membrane between their personal narrative and the collective story. This is why they often feel like outsiders, not because they don't belong, but because they're born knowing something that the world has forgotten. That every life is a symbolic journey. Once you see this, your sensitivity begins to anchor you. You stop being overwhelmed by what you feel and start tracking. If you learn to ask, why do I feel this? And even more importantly, what does this mean? What is being activated in me? Because feeling for the sensitive is not only emotional, it's the nervous system acting as antenna. And when aligned, the self, it reads these signals. Instead of paralyzing us, it's like there's a deeper layer where it's not always tranquil, but we get to see what we need to carry out, right? And even in a world that doesn't want to know, we see it all. This is the true cross of the empath, not what we feel, but that we have to bear witness. And it's no small task to hold what others bury, to name what others deny, to walk into rooms and feel the ghosts no one speaks of. Oof. To dream of what is to come and not always be believed. And yet, if the soul has called you to this, you must answer, not with martyrdom, but with conscious participation. Dream will change. You will begin to meet guides, elders, ancestors, animals that walk beside you rather than chase you. The dark forest becomes inviting, and the cave becomes a womb. The flood becomes a baptism. These are signs that the unconscious no longer sees you as passive, it sees you as initiated. You're no longer merely sensitive, you're a mystic. But here lies the great paradox. The closer you come to the self, the more alone you may feel, because most of the world isn't ready to live this way. They're still asleep, projecting, numbing, pretending, and we can't resent them for that. They are us in another form at an earlier time. So our task is not to convince, it's to embody, to live with such integrity, such presence, such inner clarity, that our very being becomes a kind of mirror. And in that mirror, others may glimpse themselves more fully. This is the role of the conscious, integrated, sensitive person in the modern world. To re-enchant the world with meaning, not through dogma or doctrine, but really through being. Your dream is your scripture. Your body is the temple. Your silence is the prayer. Your pain, the alchemical fire through which all your fragments are being forged into wholeness. If you survive this unchanged, but whoa, we return and return to this process until we get it right. So we might as well get on board. And the souls having descended into shadow and risen through symbol, wow. The final movement in the journey of the sensitive soul is returning to the world without losing the soul's depth. This is the most delicate task of all, right? It's one thing to awaken, it's another to remain awake in a world that constantly invites you to fall back asleep, to reabsorb into persona, retreat into roles, to explain away the sacred with language too shallow for mystery. And yet the soul does not forget its journey. Once you've walked the spiral path inward and lived the initiation that only the unconscious can orchestrate, you can't go back to the person you were. That person was built to survive, but now you are called to live. Here is the final warning, and it's a quiet one, the kind only the initiated can hear. Your sensitivity is no longer about you. It's the tool which the self meets the world, not to dominate, not to escape it, but to witness it. You're a weaver of meaning. The old world will still ask you to explain, to justify, to be efficient, to be simple, to follow the trends. But you're no longer simple. You're complex. You've become a vessel for the whole human experience. The wound that once made you withdraw has become a threshold. The dreams that once terrified have become instruction. The fire that once burned now illuminates your path. And you may still tremble, but now you tremble with presence, with integration, with connection, with boundaries. This is how you serve now, not by doing more or helping everyone or self-abandoning, being endlessly available. You serve by staying rooted in your own reality, in your own myth, in your own embodied knowing. Because a sensitive soul who has walked through their own darkness and emerged bearing light is dangerous to the world's illusions. This soul can no longer be manipulated. They can't be bought. They can't be made small again. Their silence speaks. Their gaze reveals. Their life becomes symbolic, not in metaphor, but in truth. And the world begins to shift in their presence. Not talking about grandiosity here. This is the mystery of the incarnated self. The self is not an idea, it's a field of awareness that has remembered its origin. It's you, but also more than you. It's the root from which your sensitivity draws, not suffering, but strength, not overwhelm, but clarity, not sorrow, but vision. So if you're sensitive and you've survived this journey, if you've descended and risen and walked with the unconscious long enough to feel its rhythm in your own breath, then know this: you're no longer fragile, you are feral. You're no longer reactive, you are responsive. You're no longer broken, you are whole. And in your wholeness, there's space for the world not to be carried, but to be held in witness. That's enough. And so we don't want to go back into performance. We don't want to be tempted to follow the trends, but we want to move forward into presence. Let our dreams continue to speak. Let our bodies continue to guide. Let our silence carry weight, and let our souls be that ancient and luminous vessel of truth, shining quietly on behalf of all those who still believe they're too much. You're not too much. You are what the world forgot it needed. You are the mirror. You are the myth. You are the medicine. You are free. So let's hold our healthy boundaries. Let's embrace this journey. Let's realize the gift that we are, and let's believe in the strength of our vessels.